Welcome to Divine Decode, the space where consciousness it meets courage and every story becomes a mirror for our own becoming. I am Pragya, and today we are exploring the art of awakening through one of the most celebrated and challenged parts of modern culture: how we drink, connect, and celebrate. Joining us is Michelle Hostin, the visionary founder of To Be Honest Beverage Co., a brand redefining what it means to raise a glass, not to escape, but to expand. Her journey from traditional drinking culture to conscious creation is one of radical honesty, inner rebellion, and the kind of liberation that starts from within. Together, we'll unpack what happens when you stop numbing and start noticing, when celebration becomes less about pouring a drink and more about pouring into your soul. And with that note, I'd appreciate that you sit down with a cup of coffee and help us dive into, and you dive in with us. And first of all, thank you so much for being here, Michelle. It's an honor to host you today, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to chat.
Michelle, let's start with this: that you described your path to conscious sobriety as a homecoming, right? And before it came before it became empowerment, or it came to that path of being empowered, and so what did that first void feel like, the quiet after saying no, and how did it lead to your empowerment journey? I want to know that.
I think a lot of people speak to transitioning away from alcohol as a very positive thing. There's a lot of physical, mental, emotional benefits that eventually come out of not consuming alcohol. But there is that transition period that happens when it feels a little bit isolating. Alcohol and drinking is such a big part of culture around the globe, different in every location and for different reasons and different celebrations and different types, but still permeates the experience of being human and socializing and being a part of larger groups and celebrating. And so although it feels like over time my story became that of a more positive narrative, there is a time in which it feels like you don't know how to fit in to culture and to social settings and to engaging with others, sometimes even just what you do with your time and how you navigate situations that you didn't even realize centered around alcohol. So it comes with a lot of self reflection, a lot of self awareness, a lot of kind of questioning your intentionality, your mindfulness, and what it is that you're doing with your priorities, your time, your resources, your effort, and your energy. And so that time for me was more soul searching than anything else. It was a time for me to sit back, reflect, decide what I wanted my life to be and what I wanted my future to be, and that was just kind of a part of the process. I think we all navigate it differently, especially because we're coming from different levels of alcohol consumption. I don't consider myself completely sober. I would consider myself either sober curious or alcohol free, considering I didn't necessarily have like an alcohol addiction or issue with alcohol. And I leave it open into my future. So even though I haven't had anything to drink in 3.5 years, it doesn't mean that I won't ever drink again. I just keep it open ended. So it's not so finite for me. And that really helps. So it's a transition. There are times in which you're going to feel left out. There are times in which you're going to feel like you don't know exactly what to do in a certain setting, but that's all part of the process. Any change, any embracing of newness or opportunity or challenge is going to push you outside of your comfort zone. And you have to navigate that comfort zone and experience the emotions and the feelings and the sentiment that comes along with that.
That's amazing. And thank you for being very honest with it, because, it's not always that perfect patch of life, and it's a very human moment. It's wonderful, and thank you for sharing that with us. To be honest, even your brand name, it feels like a mantra because, to be honest is something that we say a lot nowadays and it's the new normal. And that being your brand name is actually, it's wonderful. So, how did honesty with yourself become the foundation of this new chapter? And how was it? What was it? And how did all of this culminate into what you are? And how do you look at your life now?
Personally, at the time, I was going through a lot of kind of mental health struggles. I had been experiencing anxiety attacks for some time, and I was dealing with certain aspects of myself that I hadn't addressed previously. And so, about that time or sometime beforehand, I had started going through therapy, but that was kind of, the more conscious part of it. And I was just going in lots of different directions and feeling pulled in lots of different directions. And the phrase, to be honest, does bring about that concept of like, okay, let me be frank. Let me be clear. Let me actually express and say what it is that I want to and mean to say in any instance. And when you think about alcohol consumption, when you think about your choices overall when it comes to health and well-being, mental state, emotional capacity, spirituality, you have to start with honesty and self-awareness with where you stand. And again, because I feel like it wasn't necessarily an addiction issue where I felt like I couldn't stop drinking, it just wasn't contributing anything fantastic to my life at the time. It had become such a habit and such a go-to end of the night with friends, happy hour, events, celebrations. It was not if I was going to drink, it was simply when and what. And so it felt like I didn't have a choice in the matter at the time. And I think that's what really I needed to get honest with myself about is that am I choosing alcohol in this moment, at this time, in this instance? Or is it just the default? Is it just because I have access to it? Is it just because everybody else is? Is it just because it's the norm? It's what's expected. It's what is a part of pressure from a social perspective or from a partner perspective. And it's not to say that there's not a lot to enjoy about the drinking experience, but with all that, it just really made me realize that I wanted to make it a choice. I wanted to be the one to decide if, when, how, what in every instance. And since drinking is such an integrated part of our lives, that kind of dominoes out into the rest of things. And when you are drinking, not only is it the alcohol consumption, but it's usually the choices you make to follow as well. Maybe you're not making the best food choices. Maybe you're staying up later than you normally would. Maybe the next day you're not making the best choices because you don't feel so great. So there are all these, what I would call like domino repercussions and experiences and things in our life as a result of it. And it felt like those weren't choices anymore either. And if I was getting honest with myself, the way that it was impacting my body, my mind, my emotional state, and my life, and working towards goals and what I wanted to move forward, it felt like alcohol was just a setback and wasn't contributing to any of that. And so, since my partner and husband has been in alcohol production for over a decade, as I transitioned away from alcohol, that led to a conversation about the non alcoholic space, trying alternatives, and that eventually became, to be honest.
Hmm. Beautiful journey, and I love that. I love that. And rightly mentioned, and to add up to your thought, truth, it can become its own kind of high sometimes, and that's honestly the most beautiful feeling. And thank you for sharing the journey. In today's world, we often romanticize chaos, and it's a very normal thing at this point. Long nights, burnouts, hustle. We normalize it and we romanticize it a lot. Uh, Talking about Gen Zs, long nights, being a night owl, and staying up till 4 every day. You're out with them, and this is a very cool thing now. That oh my god, I stayed up till like 4 or 5, and you build this kind of scenario around you. So, and you yourself, you built a brand which is rooted in peace. So, how did you learn to choose calm over constant? Because the new normal is something else and you chose your own peace. So, how was that happening and what was the process that led you through through that basically?
Well, I'd have to say that, the world is so vast. There are so many people, and you can't kind of overarching say everyone is experiencing this. It's just unreasonable. With 8 billion people on the planet, over 8 billion, it's everyone's going through different seasons, different choices, different lives, different opportunities, different points of growth. But I will say that I do feel like, especially with what we're experiencing here in the US, is a little bit more of like a cultural shift and movement towards that softer culture. And whereas hustle is definitely still well and alive, and you're right, there is a sense of chaos that is being contributed to as the norm, whether that's by entertainment, media, our social engagements, work environment, the need, especially in, again, the US from a capitalism perspective, the need to scale, to grow, to constantly be on, to be accessible, always replying, always responding, always on your phone or on the computer or in an environment in which you are productive and working towards something. I also think that there is, in response to that, almost in rebuttal to that, there is this larger wave and larger movement of tuning things out, of reducing the noise, of calming, of finding that sense of peace. And whereas I think it used to be the case that it was one or the other, right? You were either in the work environment and it was all chaos, or you were sitting in on a yoga class or meditation class and you were finding your inner peace there. But where I feel like we need to head and have been heading is finding the integration of both, is that you essentially are finding your calm, your sense of peace, your state of balance in the chaos. And for myself, that took reducing the noise. It felt like I was constantly responding to everything. I was constantly in reactive mode instead of being proactive or active in my life, in my choices, in how my time was managed, in my energy, the resources that I was investing. Everything felt like it was simply a response to what was happening in my circumstances, in my environment, in my relationships, with my work, and everything else. And so it's not something that snap of the fingers happens overnight, but once you start realizing that you're in that reactive mode and you're spinning and you feel this sense of whether it's fatigue or burnout or a sensation that just something isn't right, you start to question where your time, attention, and energy are going because what we that's our lives, right? So, what we spend is time, attention, and energy on a moment to moment, day to day, week to week, month to month, year to year basis. And if you question, where I am in my health, where I am in my relationships, where I am in my professional capacity, where I am in my spirituality, where I am in whatever pillar of your life you're questioning, it's all time, attention, and energy. And so when you start to assess where those things are being spent, then you have that reflective opportunity to say, how am I going to make a change? How am I going to shift? And so some people through seasons will just drive straight through the chaos, and that's okay. And I think that unfortunately, there's a lot of shame and guilt in our society by judgment and putting pressure and expectation on other people. But I think that we're all meant to go through seasons, and that's what shapes us, and that's what builds opportunities, and that's what creates our ultimate choices. If we didn't go through that particular challenge, we might not have come out the other side and seized the opportunity. And so for each person as they navigate this, if you're listening and reflecting and saying, I am in a season of hustle and grind, and I'm okay with it because this is how I want my focus to be, and I am being proactive or I am being active, work a 10, 12-hour day because you love it and that's what you want to do. I don't think there should be any shame or guilt for that if you yourself are feeling like your other boxes are checked and you feel happy and content with what that is. But if you feel overwhelmed, frustrated, stressed, if you're constantly feeling like you're catching up, that typically means that you're in a reactive state. And so your nervous system is constantly on the defensive and constantly trying to keep up with everything. So that's when you can start cutting out the noise, is taking away those things that are simply distractions, that aren't a top priority, that have no place in your life. And that takes the self assessment, that takes the self awareness, that takes getting honest with where you stand in your circumstances, and then deciding from there, what needs to shift? What is the pivot? How can I be more intentional about where that attention, energy, and time is going so that I can create, build, and be in the space that I'm meant to be in?
That actually hits home, and that's beautiful. How even healing it can turn into another performance if they're not mindful, and it goes both ways, right? And that's wonderful. The sober, curious movement, it feels like more than just a trend, and it's a redefinition of joy. Do you think that our generation is starting to create consciousness over chaos? And as you also mentioned, that there's a way to deal with chaos, and it's sometimes also okay to be in that chaos and to um just go with the flow and let it be and work on ourselves, and it's totally normal. So do you think that it's this step that we're taking, or it's this motion that we have now, that we crave consciousness and we're just being away from chaos? So what is your take on that?
I do think that it's a larger movement. I do think that we are in a time and place that has never occurred before. The advances in technology, globalization, and the connection with which we have with information technology, and at a point in life where we really don't want for much. Now, obviously, we have difference in levels of country and location and developing nations, and we all have different access and resources. So, this doesn't necessarily apply to everyone. But for those of us, if you're listening to a podcast, it's likely that you have access to things that are the base needs for humans and the things that you feel like are you're confident having, right? You're not in a state of lack of safety and lack of comfort to a certain degree. And I think because of that, we're not worried anymore about hunting for food, foraging, worrying about our environment or whether we have a roof over our head as far as like building it. Now, of course, you might be in between places or not have a place right now. There have been times when I've been on the street not having, a rented location and struggling through those instances. But at the end of the day, first world country, we are taken care of. We have access to the internet. We can get literally anything online. We can get everything taken care of for us. And so I just think that because of those states of safety and those states of access, that it's pushing us from a consciousness perspective to then engage in different ways. So that's innovation, that's creativity, that's developing new things, that's, a lot of our big businesses and problem solving. But it also opens up the opportunity to then ask the questions, what's our purpose? How are we living our lives? Am I okay mentally? When you're in a state of survival and you're just pushing through, you don't have the opportunity to ask yourself these questions. You don't get to sit and journal on the depth of your consciousness and how you feel, think, see the world. You don't have the chance or opportunity to reflect on your belief systems. And anything is a part of that. You're just getting through. And so I think with this shift and with the access to seeing the way that other people live, hearing about other things, exposure to different ways of being, is that we are questioning those things. And I think the younger generations are definitely starting to see, okay, people did tend to drink because they were getting themselves through really terrible times. I mean, that's I think a lot of alcohol was used as a numbing and a coping mechanism in order to avoid the harsh circumstances in which we were engaged in. And now we're in a place where we have gyms and we have pools and we have fun outings and we have school and we have like a lot of these things that are just meant to be enjoyed in our lives. And with that, we question, well, then what do I need alcohol for? I'm already having fun. I'm already engaging socially. I'm already enjoying this. I'm not trying to get away from my life. I want to actually live and enjoy my life. And that's the shift that I feel like I'm seeing, and especially in younger generations. And with kind of our overarching conversation is a shift towards health and well-being, spirituality, consciousness, and being more tuned in and intentional. Now, of course, again, this isn't across the board. There are a lot of people who are still in survival mode. There are a lot of people who aren't tuning into a shift in consciousness or a change, and they're just moving through their day to day lives and they're stuck in the chaos. But like I said, there's seasons and it's growing. I think it's growing and it'll continue to grow, but there will always be different levels of people and different levels of consciousness in terms of what I would say is like maybe an overarching awakening, you know?
It definitely makes sense, and that's such a powerful reframing, and um, that's the basic redefinition. And thank you for that. Also, at last, for anybody who's listening, who's standing on that edge, who's curious but is at the very same time scared. So, where can this start? And what is that one practice that helped you replace the habit of numbing with the habit of nourishing yourself? And can you please share that habit and that one advice with the listeners and with us today?
Yeah, I think that for me, it was recognizing that there was a change that needed to be made in the first place. Because we're in that reactive state so frequently and because we're just moving day to day, and sometimes even though you have a roof over your head and running water and electricity and you've got a job and you've got a family, it can still feel like you're in survival mode because you're just trying to keep your head above water and move through the motions and do as best you can, especially with the state of the government and things that are happening, here in the US and across the globe. But to stop, pause, and reflect with enough time to say, I do want to change something, and then assess where things are currently before you take a step toward action is really figuring out it's that honesty, it's that reflection, it's that breaking down the barrier of no, everything's fine. I've got this. It's all taken care of. Checklist. I've got my to-dos. I'm waking up in the morning. I'm drinking my coffee. I'm eating my food. I'm getting out the door. When we're in that state, it's just we're rolling one moment to the next and not really taking a step back to think through, is this what I want? Is this what I want my life to be? Am I making a choice here or have I just fallen into that default and that pattern? So, taking a pause, giving yourself a chance to choose, I want to change. I want something different. I want to make a move. And then assessing what that might be, creating a plan or strategy. But before anything else, just assessing and reflecting, tracking what is your day like. For me, when I made that shift for drinking, it was understanding why I wasn't drinking and really kind of grounding that in the choice in and of itself. Because if you don't understand the motivation behind what it is that you're doing, it's unlikely that you'll follow through, that you'll continue with it, and you'll feel differently about it. You might feel ashamed, you might feel embarrassed, you might feel guilty, you might backslide and then talk negatively about yourself and then let things spiral. I think it's important to identify the why and ground yourself back into that and know that that is the underlying push for what it is that you're looking to change and to adjust.
That's amazing. And that's such a soft yet strong truth. That recovery, it isn't rejection of who we are, but a reunion with who we are. And thank you for saying that. What a powerful exchange with Michelle. A reminder that sobriety isn't about subtraction, it's about expansion. That when we stop escaping life, we start experiencing it more raw, more real, and infinitely more radiant. May this conversation inspire you to celebrate more consciously, not by what's in your glass, but by what's in your heart. Because true freedom isn't about what you walk away from, it's about what you walk into. And this was Divine Decode. I am Pragya, your host, signing off for today.